To know more such amazing stories from Indian history, click the bell icon and subscribe to Live History India.
This is the sprawling Hazardwari Palace built for the Nawab in Murshidabad in the 19th century. Built by British architect Duncan Macleod, it got its name from the 1,000 doors it had, many of which were only illusions meant to confuse possible attackers. This palace is perhaps an apt example of a time when Murshidabad was a centre of intrigue and power struggles. By the time this was built, the British were already in control in Bengal. The story of Murshidabad starts earlier, when the capital of the very lucrative Mughal Suba of Bengal was shifted here.
Dhaka became the capital of Bengal in 1608. By about 1681, the Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb had begun his Deccan campaign, which was going to be extremely expensive. Now, the funding for this campaign mostly came out of Mughal India's richest province, which was Bengal. To ensure that this revenue stream continued, Aurangzeb wanted a man in charge who was honest and straightforward. And for this, he found a man named Muhammad Hadi, who would later come to be known as Murshid Quli Khan. Now, Murshid Quli Khan was made the Diwan of Bengal in charge of revenue administration. However, the Viceroy of Bengal at the time was the young Prince Azim-ud-Shan, and the two of them never really got along well. Azim-ud-Shan is what one would think of as a sort of a spoilt Mughal prince, given to wine and women and things of that nature. And he'd do stuff like withdraw money from the state treasury without bothering to inform the Diwan. So the two of them had these constant tiffs, and Azim-ud-Shan at one point of time tried to have Murshid Quli Khan murdered. Murshid Quli Khan not only survived the attack, he actually managed to preempt it. And apparently he turned up at Azim-ud-Shan's house saying, "I heard you were planning to have me killed, so here I am." And infuriated Aurangzeb shot off a letter to his grandson saying that if there were any further complaints about his conduct, he would have him executed. But of course, eventually, I think everyone figured out that the two of them needed to be distanced from each other, otherwise Murshid Quli Khan would not be able to continue functioning. By this time, of course, Dhaka's fortunes were waning after the expulsion of the Arakanese and the Portuguese from the port city of Chittagong. And so I think around 1702, it was decided that the Diwani, or the revenue center of the state, would be shifted out of Dhaka to a different place. And for this, Murshidabad was chosen. So sometime around the 1600s, the early 1600s, I think, a brother of a certain Bengal governor by the name of Makhsus Khan established a caravanserai on the banks of the Bhagirathi River. And this is generally agreed upon as being the moment that the city of Murshidabad was founded, because that's how the city started, as a sarai. And it was originally known after Makhsus Khan as Maqsoodabad. And of course, the name changed to Murshidabad after Murshid Quli Khan shifted the capital to the area. Murshidabad was chosen, I believe, because it was a more of a central location, which would make governing a very large province, which is what Bengal was at that time, slightly easier. Very few monuments from this time survive. The only one that I can think of is the enormous, absolutely colossal Katra masjid. Now, the word Katra actually means market. And Murshid Quli Khan had established this market in the region with the mosque at its center. And therefore, Katra Masjid, Market Mosque, still survives. There are almost no other monuments from this period which survive. Murshid Quli Khan's palace was in an area called Kulhodia, which is gone. The only thing that survives is the mosque, which was built by his wife, Nosheri Banu Begum, who lies buried under its steps. Murshid Quli Khan himself is buried under the steps of the Katra masjid. His daughter Azimun-Nisa was buried under the steps of the Azimnagar Mosque, and the only thing that remains of the Azimnagar Mosque is its courtyard and one wall, because most of it was just collapsed and was destroyed in an earthquake. Now, Murshid Quli Khan had two daughters, so he was succeeded by his son-in-law, Shuja-ud-Din Muhammad Khan, or Shuja Khan, who had a bit of a reputation as being a drunk and a womanizer. Before he became Nawab, Shuja Khan had been the Naib Nazim of Odisha with his court in Cuttack. Now, at the Cuttack court, this man called Mirza Muhammad turned up. And Mirza Muhammad had been employed in the Mughal court in Delhi as a Khansama, but somehow managed to lose his job. And he had two sons by the name of Haji Ahmad and Muhammad Ali, who then joined the service of Shuja Khan. Now, Muhammad Ali, of course, is the man who would later come to be known as Alivardi Khan, and the two brothers had a very different set of talents. Alivardi was the military man, but it was Haji Ahmad who had a brilliant political mind. And together, the two of them started this plot, which would eventually result in Shuja Khan's son being overthrown. When Shuja finally died, he was succeeded by his young and very gullible son, Sarfaraz Khan. At this point of time, the court in Murshidabad and Sarfaraz was completely surrounded by advisors who were working for Haji Ahmad, and who was just trying to turn the tables in his brother's favor, and he was giving the Nawab all kinds of wrong advice, which the young Nawab was following. So ultimately, of course, Alivardi manages to raise this enormous army. He makes his way to Murshidabad. Sarfaraz rightly thinks that he's being attacked, and he chooses to go and meet this army in a place called Girya. Over there, Alivardi manages to convince him that he isn't there to fight him, but is in fact there to make his salutations and pay his respects, which is something that Sarfaraz, gullible as he is, actually believes. And the whole army is told to rest. But what nobody notices is during the night, as Sarfaraz's army is just kind of chilling out, Alivardi has moved his entire artillery behind the Nawab's camp. And as day breaks, cannonballs start landing right into the Nawab's camp. The panicky young Nawab somehow completes his prayers, gets on his elephant, and rushes out to meet the enemy, and is immediately shot in the head with a musket, and he dies. And with him ends the Nasiri dynasty, and the rule of the Afshar dynasty of Alivardi Khan begins. Now, Alivardi himself was just like Murshid Quli Khan in the sense that he too had two daughters and no sons. So he was succeeded by his grandson, the young Siraj-ud-Daulah. Now, 3 days after Siraj-ud-Daulah was born, Alivardi had been conferred the deputy governorship of Bihar. He'd been made the Naib Nazim of Patna. So Siraj was thought of as being a lucky child, and he grew up by all accounts as a bit of a spoilt brat. He was, by all accounts, a lecherous, cruel, drunk young man who was widely hated in the city. And when he'd go past people, apparently people would say, "God save us from him."
Siraj-ud-Daulah would go on to play a pivotal role in the history of the period, and by the end of his just over a year tenure as Nawab of Bengal between April 1756 and June 1757, he would take on the British East India Company, finally losing control in the decisive Battle of Plassey or Palashi, fought just south of Murshidabad. This marked a turning point in Indian history as it gave the British a firm toehold in India.
Alivardi during his tenure had realized that these European trading companies who were operating out of Bengal at that point of time, there were the English, the French, the Dutch, the Danish, probably even the Germans at one point. He had realized that these European companies represented the only growth sector in Bengal at that time. There was only so much revenue that could be squeezed out of agriculture, However, trade would continue to prosper and grow, so he had left these companies fairly unmolested. Siraj, however, had a bone to pick with the English. Now, the English East India Company at that point of time was involved in a large number of malpractices. They were trying to cheat the state government out of taxes. And so Siraj decided to teach them a lesson, which he did by attacking Calcutta in 1756 in the month of June. The British East India Company at that point of time was extremely ill prepared, and so they were quite easily defeated and driven out of the city. However, they came back in winter of that year and occupied Calcutta on the 2nd of January 1757. Siraj with his army attacked Calcutta again, but this time it was Clive who had come down from Madras, took an army unit right into the Nawab's camp and attacked it and caused a lot of damage, which frightened the young Nawab enough so that he signed a treaty with the East India Company. However, the terms of the treaty were soon violated, and that led to the Battle of Plassey, almost exactly 1 year after Siraj attacked Calcutta. And in that battle, of course, Siraj was defeated. He attempted to escape from Murshidabad from the Mansurganj palace and travel up to Rajmahal, but he was intercepted and executed, and with him ended the Afshar dynasty, which was then succeeded by the Najafi dynasty, which was led by Mir Muhammad Jafar Ali Khan, better known as Mir Jafar, who had been Siraj-ud-Daulah's commander and had turned on his master in the Battle of Plassey. But of course, the problem is that Mir Jafar had ascended the throne or the masjid of Bengal with the help of the English East India Company. And therefore, he found himself to be more and more under their thumb, as had his descendants. By 1765, the East India Company had been conferred the Diwani of Bengal, and with that, all the attention and the money and the importance shifted to Calcutta, which now began to grow at the expense of Murshidabad. Only 4 years after the East India Company had been granted their Diwani, there was a massive famine in Bengal. There are suggestions that this famine happened because of the way the East India Company was conducting its business and levying taxes. The following year, there was a smallpox epidemic. Now, both of these things together wiped out a significant portion of the population of the Murshidabad region. By 1904, which was the second centenary of the founding of the city, the population of the city had been reduced to only 15,000. When Clive had first entered the city, he had described Murshidabad as being more populous and more prosperous than even the city of London. And so therefore, a city like that being reduced to 15,000 people in a matter of 150 years is rather shocking. In fact, the population density of Murshidabad was so high, Clive had said that if the Indians living in Murshidabad had wanted to destroy the Europeans, they could have done so using only sticks and stones. Unfortunately, that decay of Murshidabad has kind of continued unabated. Contemporary accounts of Murshidabad are few and far between. We'll find a few paintings in places like the V&A collection and things of that nature. But there's really no description of what the city looked like or what the buildings were like, or even what the court of the Nawab looked like, which is rather unfortunate because we have some very detailed travelers' accounts of the court and the city in places like Gaur and Pandua.
While we have some images of Murshidabad from the olden days, we know little about the city in its prime. Politically, the history of Nawabi Bengal starting from 1717 to the end of the 19th century can be divided into three periods. The Nasiri, started by Murshid Quli Khan himself, the Afshars from Alivardi Khan till Siraj-ud-Daulah, and the Najafis after the Battle of Plassey. Today you have a smattering of monuments in Murshidabad from the 17th to 19th centuries. The oldest is the Katra masjid, where the man after whom the city is named, Murshid Quli Khan, lies buried. Then there is this massive Nizamat Imambara, rebuilt in 1847 by Nawab Mansur Ali Khan after the older Imambara, built by Siraj-ud-Daulah, was destroyed in fires.
A visitor to the city of Murshidabad today is going to see mostly monuments from the Najafi period. However, most of those monuments are not in great shape either. While the descendants of the royal family continue to live in Murshidabad, the family has been embroiled in a court case with the government for a very, very long time, which has led to some very large portions of the property being stuck in judicial limbo and slowly decaying. And this includes the Wasif Manzil, which was the last palace, I believe, which was built in Murshidabad, which is now in a very, very bad state indeed. A great amount of damage to the monuments of Murshidabad has also happened because of earthquakes, which were fairly common in the region. There was also the Bhagirathi River, which has repeatedly changed its course over time and has wiped out significant parts of the city. Siraj-ud-Daulah's palace, the famed Mansurganj palace or the Hirachil palace, is now gone. The only thing one can find of the palace are its foundations. But Jagat Seth's family still remains in the city, and although their original house again is gone thanks to the Bhagirathi River, their new house is still there and it continues to be a major tourist attraction. It's very difficult today to guess what the city of Murshidabad once was. It was certainly far, far larger than what it is today, because Murshidabad today is just like a small provincial town. Unfortunately, there's been rampant and completely out of control urbanization in the city. So a large number of monuments and historic buildings have simply been dismantled. Even today, if one looks at construction which is happening in the city of Murshidabad, one finds that old bricks are being reused, and so one can guess that those bricks must have come out of historic buildings which have since been dismantled. The government archaeology department does preserve about half a dozen or so monuments. So there is the Hazardwari Palace. There are the tombs of Siraj and his family and Shuja and his family. There is the Katra masjid, which is there, and there are one or two other like the Azim Nagar masjid, which is there. But we have failed to look at Murshidabad as a site. We have failed to look at Murshidabad as a city in its entirety. And so all our efforts at preservation have been attempts at preserving these monuments sort of piecemeal and standalone. So the challenge is to kind of recreate the city of Murshidabad for a visitor, and for that the first thing that needs to be done is to try and map the city. Now this again is an enormous task because there is no available map of Murshidabad from the 50 years when it was the capital. I had started a process in 2018 together with my friend archaeologist Dr. Tathagata Niyogi. And we have made 7 or 8 field trips to Murshidabad trying to map the city. But it's been a mammoth task because every time we go there, we seem to find something new. So if one were to look at the architecture of Murshidabad, of the few remaining monuments today, from the earlier period, the monuments that we see, the architectural style is very much in line with the Mughal architecture of the period. Especially if you look at things like the Katra Mosque or even the incomplete Futi Masjid or Forti Masjid as it is known. The one sort of accommodation which was made for the local climate that can be seen in both these mosques are these giant stone rings which one sees at the front of the mosque on top of the walls, and if you look carefully you'll make out that that is in fact there so that shamiana can be put up over the courtyard, which would make sense because in Bengal about 3 or 4 months of the year it's pouring rain, which would make it very difficult for the namazis. From the Najafi period or from Mir Jafar's period, the architecture makes a distinct shift towards European styles. The Hazarduari Palace is very, very European in style. However, on the opposite side of it is what is probably Asia's largest imambara, which is the Nizamat Imambara. And of course, imambaras and mosques is something that you find in Murshidabad today in a very large number. Around 1904, Purna Chandra Majumdar, who I believe worked as a secretary to the then Nawab of Murshidabad, had written a book which remains the only comprehensive book on the monuments of Murshidabad. It's called the Masjid of Murshidabad. And in the book, he writes that at one point of time there had been some 600 mosques in the city, but by 1904 they had been reduced in number to about 60 or 70. For a city or a town that has a population which is still under a lakh, Murshidabad still has an extremely large number of mosques. And these mosques, mostly tiny, are all in a very similar style, and most of them were constructed around the late 1700s to the early 1800s. This is a very interesting thing about the city, which has not really been studied in great detail. Why such a large number of mosques came to be built in such a short period of time, especially since the focus then had shifted very much to Calcutta. Preservation in the city of Murshidabad, one would say, is very patchy. So the monuments that have been taken up by the government are reasonably well preserved. However, the Nizamat Imambara, I am led to believe, is in precarious condition, with the roof almost turning into a concave shape in certain places, and it requires urgent attention. Work, however, on the Nizamat Imambara has begun, as has work on the Hazarduari Palace. But apart from the few monuments that the government has taken up and chosen to preserve, the rest of the city is in a state of decay. The Forti Masjid, for example, is not even officially a monument, and therefore there's no attempt at preserving it at all, and it's usually overgrown with bushes, and it's very risky to even climb inside, although a lot of people manage to do that. Very little of the original city of Murshidabad remains. For example, you had once upon a time the very powerful Kanungo family, who were the sort of Mughal equivalent of a vigilance department, one could say. And the Bongathikari Kanungos, of their house only one wall remains, and that too most people will not be aware of where it is. And that's actually the sad thing about Murshidabad today. Outside of the 6 or 7 or so monuments which are preserved, if one wants to see more, there is very little information that is available, and this is one of the things that plagues tourism in the region.
Like many of India's old capitals in India, Murshidabad is also languishing. Many of its old mosques and buildings are in deep decay. This, for instance, is all that remains of the city wall and bastion. The walls of the tombs of Siraj-ud-Daulah and Alivardi Khan in Khoshbagh tell their own story, and what is equally sad is that there are so many monuments that are not even listed on any tourist map. Murshidabad, the old capital with a legacy, needs to be saved.